The national movement early phase. In this module, you will observe the series of events which took place during the early phase of Indian national movement from 1857 to 1915. Welcome to the Parliament Museum. In this museum, you will relive some events of the Indian freedom movement that took place between 1857 and 1915. The English came to India the very first time in 1600 CE. They established the British East India Company. The establishment of British rule in India led to the economic exploitation of India. When Indians understood the exploitative policies of the British, they started to revolt against them. Thus, a long period of Indian freedom struggle started, which lasted up to 1947, when India achieved freedom. This period from 1857 to 1947 can be divided into two parts. The period from 1857 to 1915 can be termed as the early phase of Indian national movement, whereas the period from 1915 to 1947 can be understood as the later phase of Indian national movement. Observe the series of events which took place during the early phase of Indian national movement from 1857 to 1915. Tired with the unjust laws and brutal ways of the British, Indians revolted in 1857. This is known as the First War of Indian Independence. Freedom was not achieved, but it did not bring down the spirit of freedom in Indians. Rather, it generated a feeling of unity among Indians, which inspired the later stage of freedom struggle. The Indian administration, which was largely under the British East India Company, was brought under the direct rule of the British Crown after the revolt of 1857. It was one of the major consequences of the revolt of 1857. After the revolt, Indians became more aware about their political situations. They started asking for more rights and representation in the administration, but their demands were not fulfilled. Therefore, to put their demands effectively before the British, Indians formed a political party known as the Indian National Congress in 1885. The Congress tried to draw the attention of the British towards problems faced by Indians, but the British ignored them. The British were afraid of the growing demands of Indian National Congress for Indian freedom. To counter the rising Indian patriotism, in 1905, the British announced the partition of the Bengal province. People decided to protest against the partition. Indians participated in the Swadeshi movement and boycotted British goods and services. Here, the boycott means not to use British goods and services as a mark of protest. Some leaders believed that freedom for India would not be achieved by peaceful means. Therefore, they adopted some violent means. These people were known as the revolutionaries. With the efforts of these revolutionaries and the Congress, the British had to reunite the two parts of Bengal in 1911. A new turn came with the beginning of World War I in 1914. Lakhs of Indians fought as a part of British Army. Thousands were killed. It was hoped that after the war, the British would bring major reforms in Indian administration. But it did not happen. People had to face new taxes and more harsh treatment from the British. In the year 1915, Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa. With the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi, a new era began in Indian national movement, which ultimately made India a free nation. Children, did you like it?
Yes, it was very interesting and very informative. I always love to visit such museums. We get to know so much about our country and its past.
Yes, I'm happy that you liked it. Let's recap. The Indian freedom struggle lasted from 1857 to 1947. Two phases of the Indian freedom struggle are the early phase and the later phase. The early phase begins from 1857 and continues till 1915. The later phase began with the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi, that is, from 1916 to 1947. Various significant events took place in the early phase of Indian freedom struggle. They are the First War of Indian Independence in 1857, the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885, the partition of Bengal and the Swadeshi movement, World War I, and the participation of Indians in the war. The arrival of Mahatma Gandhi in India from South Africa in 1915. The national movement later phase. In this module, you will observe the series of events which took place during the later phase of the Indian national movement. Welcome to the Parliament Museum. In this museum, you will relive the Indian freedom struggle. Let's go back 100 years into history. Mahatma Gandhi returned to India from South Africa in 1915. A new era began in Indian national movement with his arrival. He influenced the freedom movement to a great extent. Because of his immense contribution to the nation, he is rightly known as the father of the nation. A series of significant events took place after his arrival. Let's look at these events one by one. The Rowlatt Act. The British government passed the Rowlatt Act in 1919. It aimed to curb the political activities in the country. This law allowed the British government to imprison any person without trial in a court of law. Mahatma Gandhi launched a peaceful movement against this unjust law. Jallianwala Bagh Massacre. Another significant event was the Jallianwala Bagh Massacre. A public meeting was held at Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar on 13th April 1919. General Dyer, the British military commander of Amritsar, ordered his soldiers to fire on people who had assembled there to protest against the arrest of some leaders. Thousands of people were killed and injured, including women and children. The whole country was shocked by this incident. Non-cooperation movement. Mahatma Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement in 1920. He asked the people not to cooperate with the British government. He asked people to boycott British goods, legislatures, courts, colleges, etc. But unfortunately, at Chauri Chaura, a place in Gorakhpur district, some people set fire to a police station. In this incident, 22 policemen were killed. After this violent incident, Mahatma Gandhi withdrew the non-cooperation movement. Revolutionaries. Many freedom fighters believed that freedom cannot be achieved only through peaceful methods. Chandrasekhar Azad, Bhagat Singh, Rajguru, and Batukeshwar Dutt encouraged people to fight against the British by taking up arms. The Civil Disobedience Movement. Civil disobedience is a method of expressing one's disagreement. Mahatma Gandhi used this method to peacefully violate unjust laws passed by the British government, such as the Salt Law. As per the law, Indians were not allowed to make salt. Mahatma Gandhi decided to break the Salt Law. He launched the Civil Disobedience Movement and launched the Dandi March on 6th April 1930. He reached the coastal village of Dandi near Surat and raised a handful of salty mud and declared, "With this, I'm shaking the foundations of the British Empire." World War II. World War II broke out in 1939 and Britain used Indian people and resources without the consent of Indians. Indian leaders were unhappy at this step taken by the British. The Congress ministers from 8 provinces resigned to express their disagreement with British policies. Quit India Movement. British policies disturbed Indian leaders. Mahatma Gandhi started the Quit India Movement on 8 August 1942. The objective of the Quit India Movement was to achieve complete independence for India. Mahatma Gandhi gave a call to do or die in his Quit India speech to achieve this objective. Indian Independence Act. Finally, the British realized that it is not possible for them to rule India anymore, and they decided to leave India. By the Indian Independence Act, which was passed by the British Parliament in July 1947, India became free. However, two nations, India and Pakistan, came into existence through this act. Let's recap. A new era began in Indian freedom struggle with the arrival of Mahatma Gandhi in 1915. The British government passed the Rowlatt Act in 1919 to curb the political activities in India. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place in Amritsar on 13th April 1919. Hundreds of people were killed and injured. In response to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, Mahatma Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement in 1920. Mahatma Gandhi launched the civil disobedience movement in 1930. World War II broke out in 1939. Britain declared Indian participation in the war without the consent of Indian leaders. Mahatma Gandhi started the Quit India movement on 8 August 1942. India attained freedom on 15th August 1947. India gains freedom. In this module, you will relive the moments and events which led to the independence of India.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Can anybody guess who said these lines?
Ma'am, I'm not sure, but I guess these lines are taken from the famous speech of our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru.
That's great. How do you know that?
Ma'am, my grandpa told me the story of Indian independence. In that story, he mentioned about this famous speech.
That's really good.
Ma'am, but I don't know much about this story. Can you please tell me more?
Sure, Sophie. In fact, today our topic is India gains freedom. Let me tell you about this exciting story. There were a series of significant events which finally led to the freedom of India in 1947. Although the first war of independence was fought in 1857, when Indians first rebelled against British rule. But today, you will learn about those events which took place just before independence and became milestone events for making Indians free from British rule. These events can be listed as follows: World War II, Quit India movement, formation of Indian National Army, Indian Independence Act, partition in 1947. First such event was World War II. The World War II broke out in 1939. The British declared war against Germany, Italy, and Japan. They used Indians and India's resources without any discussion with Indian leaders in this regard. One of the major political parties, the Congress, did not like the decision taken by the British government. In protest, the Congress ministers resigned from their provinces. The Congress told the British government that India would only join the war if the power to rule them would be given to the Indians during the war itself, and complete independence would be granted after the war. The British government did not agree to the Congress demand. As a result, under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi, Congress launched the Quit India movement in 1942. Mahatma Gandhi gave the slogan, "Do or die." The British arrested Mahatma Gandhi and other leaders. Some leaders were not convinced with Mahatma Gandhi's idea of non-violence. One such leader was Subhash Chandra Bose. He believed that the British would never leave India peacefully. Therefore, he went to Japan via Russia and Germany. In Japan, he organized the Indian National Army, INA, or the Azad Hind Fauj. The soldiers of the Indian National Army fought bravely, but finally the British defeated them. However, the resistance by the Quit India movement and the soldiers of the Indian National Army made the British government realize that now their days of ruling India are over. The British had decided to leave India. Meanwhile, the Muslim League, a party under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, demanded a separate nation for the Muslim community. Mahatma Gandhi was not in favor of any kind of partition of India. He always believed in Hindu-Muslim unity, but he could not prevent the partition. Finally, the Indian Independence Act received the royal assent on 18 July 1947, which paved the way for the independence of India, and the partition of India resulted in the formation of two different nations, India and Pakistan. It was a strange time. People were happy to get freedom from the British rule after a long time. Simultaneously, people were sad because of sufferings of the partition. After independence, Jawaharlal Nehru was elected the first Prime Minister of free India. Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the first President. It was a new beginning for India. Let's recap. World War II broke out in 1939. Mahatma Gandhi launched the Quit India movement in 1942. Subhash Chandra Bose organized the Indian National Army, INA, or the Azad Hind Fauj. The Indian Independence Act was passed in 1947. The partition of India resulted in the formation of two nations, India and Pakistan.